What's that? Take cover. It's another heretic!
Hello, everyone. This is Brother Nathan or Another Heretic, whichever you prefer. I have exciting news today. A couple announcements here before we get into what we're going to do. What we're going to do today is finally continue reading Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy. We're going to be in chapter 17, but before we get there, a couple of announcements. Number one, I have a new video up. Where do we begin? With Jacob. This is a conversation I had with an old high school friend who is on a spiritual journey. I would say that we're very like-minded, so I would consider him a brother in Messiah. That conversation's up right now. It's premiering at the time that I'm announcing this. And then in other news, I have been made a saint. So I am now Saint Heretic, and that means that yes, you are able to pray to me. Of course, I'm being facetious. But yeah, I like the art style. At least it's pretty cool. But yeah, obviously, just a way for me to have fun with people as I troll the internet and also try to spread the gospel of the kingdom. So yes, you can now refer to me as either Another Heretic, Saint Heretic, or Brother Nathan, whichever you prefer. So if you go to anabaptistapologist.com, you can go to the library tab. You can scroll all the way down, click Rulers of Evil, hit Control F, search for chapter 17, and that's where we're going to be today, reading A Timely Grand Tour. Actually, real quick here, before I do, there's something else I want to announce. In addition to the video, I have 2 new articles. Gnosticism, ? So I tried to look at what's generally considered to be Gnosticism. I compare it to the mainstream evangelical worldview, and then I provide my agreements and disagreements and sort of explain my understanding of these things. So that study was up as of December 7th, and then my latest, published December 20th, is When the Saints Don't Go Marching In. This is looking at Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 and 53. And I think asking some good, reasonable questions and considering what some scholars think and just providing some thoughts on it. So with those announcements all finally out of the way, we are going to read chapter 17 of Rulers of Evil, A Timely Grand Tour. Among the many British visitors to Rome during Clement the 14th's sweetening toward England in the early 1770s was a young member of an ancient ruling family of Dorset and Somerset counties named Charles Philip Stourton. Charles Philip was nephew to the Dukes of Norfolk. We remember the Norfolks, Thomas and Edward Howard, for their significant contributions to American independence. Thomas, originator of colonial Freemasonry; Edward, coupler of Lord Bute to the future George III. Arriving in Rome with Charles Philip was his professor at the Jesuit college in the medieval Flemish, now Belgian, city of Bruges, John Carroll. The pair were enjoying a grand tour of Europe, which had begun in the summer of 1771. From Bruges, they had proceeded by carriage down through Alsace-Lorraine and Strasbourg, across the Rhine to Baden-Baden, then upstream to Karlsruhe, Brussels, Heidelberg, Mannheim, Worms, and Mainz. From Mainz, they made a curious detour over to Trier, back to Mannheim, through Swabia to Augsburg, then to Munich, Innsbruck, across the Italian border to Trent, along the Adige River to Roveredo, Verona, Mantua, Modena, Bologna. They reached Rome in the autumn of 1772. Yeah, sorry. Just a disclaimer as usual. Sorry to butcher anything that I might be butchering. Bear with me. In Rome, Lorenzo Ricci appointed Carol to the position of prefect of the Sodality. This title designates, according to the New Catholic Encyclopedia, quote, a chief organizer of laymen for the promotion of some form of social action, end quote. For the promotion of what social action, I wonder, might Ricci have ordained Carol to organize, if not the American Revolution? While John was in Rome with Lorenzo Ricci, his cousin Charles Carroll, now in his mid-30s, pulled off a clever media ruse in Maryland. It won him tremendous popularity and established him as an important civic leader. In January 1773, a letter in the Maryland Gazette attacked the administration of Maryland Governor Robert Edens. The letter was signed First Citizen. In a subsequent Gazette, the attack was demolished by the eloquent arguments of a second citizen, but in February, First Citizen demolished Second Citizen. As the duel continued on into the summer, First Citizen was revealed to be Charles Carroll, whereupon Second Citizen nastily slandered Carroll, putting him down as a disenfranchised Catholic. Suddenly now, Carroll was an underdog, just like his fellow Americans in relation to the British Crown. Although Charles was a super-rich lawyer landowner educated at the best Jesuit colleges in Europe, the people lavished him with sympathy. They despised Second Citizen for his bigotry. Maryland and America now had a new hero, a preeminent champion of religious liberties, a Roman Catholic First Citizen advocating a new political order. Loathsome Second Citizen made the status quo seem distasteful and undesirable, which, of course, was his assignment in the ruse. Second Citizen turned out to be the acknowledged head of the American bar, a Mr. Delaney. Meanwhile, with the coming of spring, Carroll and Staunton left Rome for Florence, Genoa, Lyons, Paris, Liege, arriving back in Bruges just a few weeks before Ganganelli, Clement XIV, established the Jesuits. Carroll kept a journal of the tour, partly a study guide for Charles Phillip, partly a travelogue. It's a fragmentary and circumspect document, as one historian gingerly put it. Here and there one finds snatches of informal political opinion. Although Carroll's opinions are interesting, it's his circumspection that intrigues us most. It's what his journal doesn't say. Traveling with a student appears ordinary enough, but Charles Philip Staunton was no ordinary collegian. He was a student of casuistry, equivocation, and Bellarminian liberation theology, taught by professionals sworn to expand Roman Catholicism and extirpate Protestantism. He had been indoctrinated to obedience through the spiritual exercises, was a member of England's premier Catholic and Masonic family, and was about the age of Alexander Hamilton, who by then was already turning out anonymous revolutionary pamphlets at King's College in New York. Nor were Carroll and Staunton merely sightseeing. They were up to something big. Carroll's journal alludes to meeting with high-ranking officials in church and state, but gives no specific names. Writing to an English Jesuit colleague, he confided, "I keep a close incognito during this time." Despite Carroll's circumspection, his itinerary reveals certain clues. Consider that odd detour to Trier from the route between Mainz and Mannheim. Trier is more than 200 kilometers out of the way, quite a long day's journey. What might warrant such a deviation? There appeared in 1763 a highly controversial book by an obviously pseudonymous person, Justinius Febronius. The pseudonym belonged to Bishop Nicholas von Hontheim, Chancellor of the University of Trier. In John Carroll's day, Trier University had been run by Jesuits for more than a century. The book, of which there is apparently no published English translation out of its original Latin, is entitled On the State of the Church and the Legitimate Power of the Roman Pontiff. The gist of State of the Church suggests why Carroll had to visit Trier. Febronianism, the philosophy of von Hytham's book, contains the formula for administering Protestant America as a Bellarminian commonwealth. Febronianism calls for decentralizing the Roman Catholic Church into independent national churches modeled on the Church of England. Because they are ruled directly by kings and princes, these churches are more correctly called states. The Pope may be successor to Peter, Prince of the Apostles, but under Febronianism, he has no legal jurisdiction. He is merely a principle of unity, a spiritual unifier obligated to abide by the decrees of general councils under the leadership of bishops and their properly enlightened laymen. Crucial to Febronianism's application is thorough popular education. Once laymen, bishops, and councils are properly enlightened, they will be empowered to resist any attempts of the papacy to exert monarchical control over the church. Febronius emphasized that his system would succeed only in a milieu of popular enlightenment. His context presumes an enlightenment wherein the public is indoctrinated with the Jesuit Ratio Studiorum's full humanist diet, of course. It cannot operate where Scripture reigns supreme. Once the milieu's understanding, its mentality, has been shaped by the superior general of the Society of Jesuits, it will respond with unquestioning obedience to the will of the man whose fundamental duty is the expansion of Roman Catholicism and the extirpation of Protestantism. Thus will unfold a perfect secular political state within the Roman Catholic Church, an autocracy ruled by a monarch invisible to all but the few who, by the grace of God, cannot be deceived. Febronianism was the secret formula for returning the non-Catholic world to the bosom of the Church. To mask this fact, the Vatican dramatically condemned the book. The Jesuited Clement XIII had banned it from colleges and universities. In a rather quaint example of academic blown cover as cover, Bishop von Hontheim, whom few realized was Febronius, even banned it from his own classes at the university. On the State of the Church is arguably Lorenzo Ricci's American Manifesto, the social blueprint for how the general intended to realize Bellarminian liberation in a Protestant monarchy. The full title of the first edition copy of the book says it all: On the State of the Church and the Legitimate Power of the Roman Pontiff, a singular book on the properly ordered reunification with dissidents in the Christian religion. Here one beholds a description of the momentous social change that the American Revolution would indeed produce. Neither monarchical overthrow, nor democracy, nor republicanism, but a properly ordered reunification with dissidents in the Christian religion. That is, the reunification of Roman Catholics with Protestants under a secularized religion whose values, long on humanism, short on Scripture, are taught through public schools following the Jesuit Ratio Studiorum. Reunification means that Protestantism has been reabsorbed into Rome. This, in the eyes of the Black Papacy, to the Sun Tzu in mind, and to the common sense, equals the practical extirpation of Protestantism. Wow. That's incredible. This is, I think, what we are seeing today. Quite a bit of, especially in the right wing conservative uh, political arena. We see Protestants and Catholics really lay aside a lot of their so-called differences in order to elect certain political figures into office. Uh, so there's this really soft line between Protestants and Catholics. More and more, it seems. Um, Really, just Christendom in general is this really weird amalgamation of different diverging interpretations, but really they're all still unified. I mean, they all believe in the same Trinity. They all believe and keep the same general sort of communion or Lord's Supper. Yeah, they disagree on whether or not it's literal or figurative, but they're still doing the same thing. They all celebrate the same holidays for the most part. Um, I mean, yeah, it's really not all that divergent. One of my main complaints early on in my conversion, when I actually began to try to study and understand these things, one thing that became very apparent to me is that the Protestants didn't really seem to have reformed a whole lot. Once I had read the 95 Thesis myself, and I saw that Luther really wasn't opposing the papacy. He was just hoping that the papacy would make some improvements. It became obvious to me that it was a psyop. So, continuing on now, he writes, although Bishop von Heinsheim lived in Trier, he was Archbishop of Mainz. His jurisdiction extended to the Mainz Principality of Hesse-Hanover. Von Heinsheim was thus the spiritual counterpart of the ruler of Hesse-Hanover, Frederick II, not to be confused with the King of Prussia, Frederick the Great, who was also a Frederick II. Frederick II of Hesse was married to the aunt of the King of England, which made him George III's uncle. Born a Protestant, Frederick subscribed to the Rosicrucian style of Freemasonry. Although Jesuits converted him to Roman Catholicism, he nevertheless remained a Rosicrucian secretly active. Frederick of Hesse was one of Europe's richest rulers. Much of his business was handled by his son, Prince William, also a Rosicrucian Freemason. William's specialty was facilitating war. He drafted able-bodied male Hessians, outfitted and trained them for battle, and then sold them to his English cousin George, who used them to fight alongside his own redcoats. Every time a Hessian was killed, William received a reparation in the form of extra compensation. As casualties mounted, so did his profits, which he loaned out at interest. Yeah, real quick aside here. It's really weird when you look at the word soldier. You know, it's there's a lot of ways that you can sort of break that down. Phonetically, you get some interesting things like soul dyer. Your sole purpose is to die, right? You're just cannon fodder. But also the word soul is sun. So soul dyer, you're a sacrifice essentially to the sun god, Apollo, the god of war, or Mars, whatever. It's all wicked satanic stuff. War is a racket, and this is why the elite are rich, because they invest in war, and they will sell us into it, trap us into it, traffic us into it. So anyway, continuing. In September 1769, Prince William appointed Meyer Amschel Rothschild of nearby Frankfurt to transact some of his financial affairs in the capacity of crown agent. Aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family, I looked them up in Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered that they bear the title Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. No kidding. Wow. The Vatican treasury, of course, holds the imperial wealth of Rome. Imperial wealth grows in proportion to its victories in war. As the Jesuit empowerment Regimini Militanis Ecclesiae implies, the church at war is more necessary than the church at peace. According to H. Russell Robinson's Illustrated Armor of Imperial Rome, Caesarian soldiers protected themselves in battle with shields painted red. Since the soldiery is the state's most valuable resource, the Council of Trent admitted this is preferring the Jesuits to all other religious orders. It is easy to understand why the red shield was identified with the very life of the church. Hence, the appropriateness of the name Rothschild, German for red shield. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? I believe this appointment explains why the House of Rothschild is famous for helping nations go to war. It is fascinating that, as Meyer Rothschild's sons grew into the family business, the firm took on the title Meyer Amschel Rothschild und Sohn, which gives us the Notarican Mars. Isn't Mars the Roman god of war, whose heavenly manifestation is the red planet? There is powerful Kabbalah here, and there's hardly an acre of inhabitable earth that hasn't been affected by it in some way. Wow, this is yeah. If you suffer from cognitive dissonance, then those sorts of connections, patterns will not be made, which is why so many of us are under cognitive dissonance, and we keep falling for the same trap because we're not awake to we are not awake. We're just not awake. And the cognitive dissonance serves the elites well because it allows them to continue to do the evil that they do. But a lot of people obviously don't have pattern recognition, or else they would be able to make these connections and see these patterns. But they don't. It's really sad, which is why it's really important, I think, for me to continue to read through this book. I know it's not consistent. I'm not always the most consistent with it, but I still have to tell myself that it has to be done, because not a lot of people understand or know the different sorts of causes behind a lot of the things that we're going through, and who is the cause of it. So anyway, let's continue. So I wanted to copy and paste that to Facebook. That was a really good passage. So where was I? Yes, right here. So it may never be known if John Carroll and Charles Philip Storton paid a call on the offices of Meyer Rothschild during their grand tour. Carroll was not permitted to keep a record, and the Rothschild's name is synonymous with secrecy. But a call, keeping it close incognito, at the house of Rothschild would not be inconsistent with outcome. The newly designed prefect of the Sodality, chief organizer of laymen for social action, would have a legitimate need to talk finances with the church's most secret trustee. As things were developing, General Ricci needed an American financial crisis to provoke the colonists into resolving the utter necessity of war. Carroll's journal reflects that he and Staunton did enter the Frankfurt Mainz area, which is Rothschild country, in the early spring 1772. If we suppose they talked financial crisis with the Rothschilds, the outcome of their talks actually did occur several months later. During July, in fact, the British banking system underwent a severe credit reduction. This consequently threw American merchants into an extreme financial distress that did not end until the Revolutionary War itself produced a business boom in 1776. Rothschild, with his access to Hesse Hanover's vast wealth, and conceivably that of the Jesuits as well, had power to effect a credit reduction in British banking, and Rothschild's profiting from the Revolutionary War is well known. If, during the spring of 1772, the circumspect young Jesuit professor conveyed to the powerful young Jewish banker Lorenzo Ricci's need for a financial disturbance in England and America, didn't John Carroll admirably serve his superior general, his church, and his country? And didn't Rothschild do his client likewise? Even as Carroll and Staunton were networking, according to my surmise, with Ricci and the bankers of war, Amiot's Sun Tzu was published. Carroll's circumspection bars us ever from knowing whether he and Staunton came upon a copy and read it. Did Rothschild know the book? Even if they knew it well, the experience could not possibly have been for them the adventure in irony it is for us now. We open the 13 articles, and hear the gentle voice of the man in charge of the papacy's most important business, the man who decided everything, who was in the process of gaining advantage from dangerous and critical circumstances, whose intentions were unguessable, whose decisions were shaping both his own army and the armies of his English-speaking Protestant enemies, the man who through cleverness and ruse had already secured the obedience of his enemies in London and Boston and Paris and Philadelphia, although they believed him and his army to be far away and slumped in rest from sustained losses, the man who would win in the most important war in modern times without giving battle or drawing a sword, who uniquely knew the day, the hour, the moment of battle-less, swordless combat. Lorenzo Ricci's voice whispers to us across the centuries between the lines and passages such as these. Quote, "A state's most important business is its army. It is the general who decides everything. If he is clever, he will gain an advantage from even the most dangerous and critical circumstances. He will know how to shape at will, not only the army he is commanding, but also that of his enemies. Try to be victorious without giving battle, without spilling a drop of blood, without even drawing a sword. The clever general succeeds in capturing cities. Without setting a foot in a foreign kingdom, he finds the means to conquer them. He acts in such a way that those who are inferior to him can never guess his intentions. He has them change location, even taking them to rather difficult places where they must work and suffer. Do not disdain the use of artifice. Begin by learning everything there is to know about your enemies. Know exactly what relationships they have, their reciprocal liaisons and interests. Do not spare large amounts of money. Have spies everywhere. Be informed of everything. Overlook nothing to corrupt what is best on the enemy's side. Offers, presents, caresses, let nothing be omitted. Maintain secret liaisons with those amongst the enemy who are the most depraved. Use them for your own ends, along with other depraved individuals. Cross through their government, sowing dissension among their chiefs. Ceaselessly give them false alarms and bad advice. Engage the governors of their provinces in your interests. That is approximately what you must do if you wish to fool them by cleverness and ruse. When a clever general goes into action, the enemy is already defeated. When he fights, he alone must do more than his entire army, not through the strength of his arm, but through his prudence, his manner of commanding, and above all his ruses. The great secret of solving all problems consists of the art of knowing how to create division when necessary. What is far must be brought near, advantage must be drawn even from losses, and slowness must be turned into diligence. You must be near when the enemy believes you to be far, Have a real advantage when the enemy believes you have sustained some losses. Be occupied by useful work when he believes you are slumped in rest, and use all sorts of diligence when he only perceives you to be moving slowly. Thus, by throwing him off track, you will lull him to sleep in order to attack him when he expects it the least and without him having the time to prepare for it. As it is essential for you to be completely familiar with the place where you must fight, it is no less important for you to know the day, the hour, even the moment of combat. That is a calculation which you must not neglect. You therefore, or at the head of an army, must overlook nothing to render yourself worthy of the position you hold. Throw your gaze upon the measurements of quantities and the measurements of dimensions. Remember the rules of calculus. Consider the effects of balance. Examine what victory really is. Think about all of this deeply, and you will have everything you need in order to never be defeated by your enemies. They who possess the true art of governing troops well are those who have known and who know how to make their power formidable, who have acquired unlimited authority, who are not brought low by any event, no matter how vexing, who do nothing with precipitation, who conduct themselves as calmly when they are surprised as they do when their actions have been planned long in advance, and who always act in everything they do with that promptness which is, in fact, the fruit of cleverness combined with great experience. The strength of this sort of warrior is like that of those great bows, which can only be stretched with the help of some machine. Their authority has the effect of those terrible weapons which are shot from bows which are thus stretched. Everything succumbs to their blows. Everything is laid low. If you do exactly as I have indicated, success will accompany all your steps. Everywhere you will be a conqueror. You will spare the lives of your soldiers. You will affirm your country in its former possessions and secure new ones. You will augment the splendor and glory of the state, and the prince as well as his subjects will be indebted to you for the sweet tranquility in which they will henceforth live their lives. What objects can be more worthy of your attention and all your efforts? Wow. What an incredibly wicked person. A duplicitous, satanic deceiver, warmonger, who's very clearly willing to do whatever it takes, up to and including sexual deviancy of all sorts in order to achieve power, control, profit. And hence why we're all in the situation that we're in. And it's obvious. This is the game they play with us. Charles, Philip Stourton, and John Carroll departed Rome for Flanders in March 1773. The journey took them 4 months. They passed through Florence, Genoa, Lyons, and Paris, arriving in Liege in early July. John returned Charles Philip to his father, Lord Stourton, and proceeded alone to the Jesuit college at Burgess. Meanwhile, in London, during the month of April, the British East India Company presented the king's friends a scheme which, if measured by the way it would anger American merchants and point them inexorably toward rebellion, could only have sprung from the sun-stewing intellect of Lorenzo Ricci. Quote, I demand the art of making enemies move as one wishes, end quote. That scheme, a plan to glut New England with cheap tea, is the subject of our next chapter. Which, chapter 18, is the stimulating effects of tea. I think this will be rather interesting. Thank you for listening, everyone. It's been a while since I've read this, but I have some time with an extended weekend, so I hope to get a lot more content out. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. What Jesus says to one, he says to all. Repent and believe the gospel, for the kingdom of God and of heaven is at hand.